right, I'm gonna call it. I say we should just get into it now. As John Williams' Olympic fanfare concludes, which was written for the 1984 Olympics, and has very kind of fascist imperial under and overtones. My name is Johnny Coleman, he, him pronouns. I'm one of the kind of founding set of members of No Olympics LA. We just celebrated our 3rd year anniversary. So we've been doing this work for about 3 years. A lot of us have been doing work for much longer than that. And a lot of us are very new. So today's subject is obviously going to be the 1984 LA Olympics, which we feel are kind of vastly misrepresented in the media. Ever since day one of this project, the specter of the LA84 Olympics has kind of hung over us and influenced how people talk about 2028, how people talk about LA as a city in general, how the media kind of is a part of the whole Olympic system. So we thought it would be a good idea to do a deep dive, and we have a bunch of really cool articles and other media coming out this next month about this. And so without further ado, actually, I will make that announcement one more time. We'll be filming today, so if you don't want your face or your name to be associated with any of this stuff, please either turn off the camera or change your name. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We won't have a time to do a full, we have at least 40 people on the line right now. So in the interest of time, we are going to just move that into the chat function. There will be a lot of information today, and we will have this deck available. So do not worry if you do not catch every detail, or you don't have to feel like you need to take notes necessarily if you don't want to. If at any point you do, yes. If at any point you do not know what we're talking about, please throw out glossary in the chat, and we will stop and try to answer that for you to make sure you know what we're talking about. So, hey, Gigi, can you help me change the name for Robin? Give them the permission to change their name. I can't figure that out right now. But yeah, we'll definitely take care of that for you, Robin, real quick. And without further ado, let's jump into 1984 Olympics. So slide, please. Next slide. So before we jump into all this, we want to just kind of back up and make sure you know exactly who we are and where we're coming from. Next slide, please. Like I said, we launched in early 2017 by the Housing and Homelessness Committee of DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, the LA chapter. We now have a couple dozen groups within LA and California, and we have a much larger kind of transnational network and coalition that's been forming in the last 3 years. We've been working on that as well. Okay, next slide. This is kind of the nut of where all of our analysis comes from, is that we categorically oppose the prospect of an LA Olympics and refuse to measure success in terms of profit. So we will be talking about budgets and profit and the idea of profit today to a certain extent, but in general, it doesn't matter to us if an Olympics is profitable. It will necessarily do a bunch of harm regardless of where it goes. So, as anti-capitalists, like, we're not really here to talk about money. We're here to talk about the human and social cost. Next slide. These 6 points happen in every single modern Olympics. We see gentrification and displacement, police militarization, increased criminalization, labor exploitation of the athletes, the volunteers, city workers, street vendors, sex workers, you name it. This diversion of resources that happens for usually a decade leading up to and a decade after an Olympics at least. Erosion of democracy, because the Olympics are inherently anti-democratic. So that kind of really influences how a city operates for a long, long time. And environmental degradation, because the IOC, despite their kind of greenwashing narratives, do not give a shit about the environment. Next slide, please. We like to frame things as who wins and who loses. So today, as we go through and talk about 1932 and 1984, think about who is winning, who is losing. Everything always breaks in these 2 columns. If any of this stuff, we don't have time to break this down, and our last presentation was kind of entirely focused on this. So we have a whole deck on this if you're interested in this. If anything is not super intuitive from this list, maybe call it out real quick. Or we can unpack it later if you like. But it's basically rich, powerful interest, moneyed interests on the left-hand side, and then poor, marginalized, and folks on the right side that usually pay the cost, both the literal and metaphorical cost for the Olympics. Next slide, please. So next slide. Why are we looking at LA84? Very early on, Mike Davis, an academic and socialist, well-known California writer, told us that there's a lot of unreported and nefarious stuff going on in LA84. He said during the last Olympics and in the 80s, what the city did was create a beauty strip so you could drive from LAX and you were in the nice neighborhoods all the way, not realizing that half a block on either side was poverty. And it was also a kind of Archimedean lever. Next slide. He goes on, I was there in LA the year after the Olympics. It was startling to come back after being out of the country for 8 or 9 years because the whole industrial landscape, which as a good socialist I knew by heart, had been transformed. Places I used to work, it was all shut down. But what took its place was a proliferation of hundreds, if not several thousands of more sweatshops. Next slide. And actually, I made a mistake on this slide. This was from 2017. This was one of the first things he told us was the key to the 1984 Olympics, I believe, was the coordination of the planning with the USC and CRA's redevelopment strategy for Exposition Park and West Adams. The university was the event's great beneficiary. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the Coliseum, the 84 games, the 32 games, is how is USC positioned around this? Next slide. So yeah, back to the question of like why look at 84. It created the new ultra capitalized model for the Olympics. It was known as the capitalist games, and we saw all sorts of new high stakes corporate sponsorships put in place. It accelerated and sugarcoated the hyper-militarization of local law enforcement. In general, we don't claim that the Olympics creates any of these problems from thin air, but that really accelerates and exacerbates them. It normalized sweeps of the poor in LA, and that became a fixture in the last 15 to 20 years of how we do business in LA. LA84 and 2028 beneficiaries overlap significantly. It's not just that, oh, these are the same types of folks. It's literally in some situations these same folks and entities. So yeah. And lastly, the myths of LA84 are the same myths used to sell 2028 in many ways. So if we want to fight and resist 2028, we should know our history. Next slide. And knowing our history means if we want to talk about 84, we should talk about 1932, because as little is really understood about 1984, even less is understood about 1932. LA in general, and this is a generalization obviously, but is not known for knowing its own history very well. So I'm going to do a brief little section on 32, because as you'll see, it's the same pattern. And all of this comes from Dreamers and Schemers by Barry Siegel, just FYI. So who is behind LA32? It was one real estate developer named Billy Garland and 6 newspaper tycoons, and they're all super reactionary capitalists. We're talking about Otis, Chandler, all these people with really pronounced right-wing politics. And the goal of the 32 Olympics was real estate speculation, and to put this kind of budding metropolis on the map and establishing LA as a single-family middle-class oasis. Like the idea that anyone, if you work, you can come to LA, buy a home, palm trees, good weather, blah, blah, blah. Next slide. So what we saw in the decade leading up to the 32 Olympics, because this was being pushed by a real estate developer, there was all sorts of development, including the Coliseum, which if you look now on, let's say, the Coliseum's website or other kind of publications, you will not see them framing the 32 Olympics as the reason that the Coliseum was built, but that's exactly what happened. They realized that they could not entice the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, to come to LA unless they had a mega arena that was worthy of, all the fanfare and spectacle. There was one world-class hotel that they wanted to build, at least, that where all the rich and, all the famous and European nobility that would be coming over to America for the first proper Summer Olympics could stay in. So they built the Biltmore Hotel, which, does anyone know what's happening at the Biltmore right now? I guess that's a tangent, but it's being used by police right now for COVID quarantines, which I think is interesting. Anyway, they built and financed by Harry Chandler, another one of the newspaper magnates, the largest hotel, quote, west of Chicago. And this was just as LA was hitting 1 million in its population. Another thing they needed to build was the Baldwin Hills Olympic Village, and this is the first time they actually built a proper Olympic village, and it was dismantled immediately after the games. And they also they built a new city hall in the early 30s, and there's a reason why it has 32 floors. And one of the builders of the Coliseum was also helping build that. So there's a long story of how they sold the bid, and they didn't really need any public input, but the bid was settled in 1923. Now, obviously, by the end of the 20s, the Great Depression hit. Next slide. And the long story short of this is there were many, many opportunities where the games did not make sense and they should have been stopped, and they did not stop. And the show went on, even though Hoovervilles were exploding everywhere in LA. Poverty was obviously, I don't know, there was a huge problem of poverty, houselessness, all this other stuff. And there was no interventions really that were successful in stopping it. So that's something I think we should all take to heart as we talk about our own organizing. The Coliseum was essentially, it's a very complicated story of how the Coliseum was built. And one of the narratives of 1932 Olympics that would be repeated later in the 84 games is that they made money, is that they profited. Essentially what happened in 32 is that all the money that they borrowed from the city and the state was essentially just paid back, so that there really wasn't any substantial profit. Anyway, next slide. But like I said, when the Great Depression hit in the late 20s, the press was even attacking this as Garland's folly, as the 32 Olympics, as, you know, maybe this shouldn't happen. Against this backdrop, hunger marchers were demonstrating at the state capitol in Sacramento, brandishing placards that called for, quote, groceries, not games. In Los Angeles, activists seeking jobs marched through the streets one night, breaking windows in stores that displayed Olympic pennants. So clearly there was a demand, like, from the people that saw that this was like a foolish endeavor. Grantland Rice, the famous hacky sports writer, said, "Depression or no depression, slump or whatnot, this is going to be the greatest sporting show ever held upon the crust of the spinning globe." So while there was some pushback in the press, the people behind the Olympics mostly controlled the media in LA, and they kept on pumping these, no, this is what we need in the darkest time, is this redemption narrative that the Olympics will bring us together, will put LA on the map, it will save LA, and will save the Olympics. Next slide, please. So obviously the 32 Olympics happened, right? There were sporting events. They went on, you know, relatively without a hitch as far as the Olympic organizers were concerned, and they framed it as a huge success. One of the things that I think a lot of people in LA do not know is that the reason we have palm trees everywhere is for the 32 Olympics, is because they wanted to project this idea of like a tropical or desert, you know, oasis vibe, and when really LA is like a chaparral, it's not really a desert. And now 100 years later, they're all dying because they didn't really have a plan for that. Another outcome is that the city was essentially, for at least a decade, being run by real estate interests, and to a large extent, the newspaper industry. We're all now addicted to a single family home, and that's why LA has a ton of density issues right now. It created the Coliseum, which we have people that organize with us that are being displaced who live near the Coliseum to this day, 100 years later. It established megasports as an economic and development engine, which, you know, we're still obviously organizing around 100 years later. And LA would go on to bid for 11 consecutive Summer Olympics between 32 and 84. When the 1940 Olympics were canceled, they were supposed to take place in Japan, but they were canceled because of World War I. In the late 30s, Billy Garland tried to have them be hosted in LA. So that's even another Olympics that they tried to vie for. And you'll notice that the only time that LA ever got the Olympics, in 32, in 84, or in 2028, is when no one else in the world wanted them. So think about that. And the other thing we got from the Olympics is 10th Street. It used to be 10th Street, and now it's Olympic Boulevard. So yeah, we can skip this slide for now, but there's a lot more detail from that book that I'm not a huge fan of, but it does have some interesting research. And the last one is about a story about someone who was an Olympic champion at that game who literally had to sneak food from the Olympic Village to bring home because they were literally going to bread lines. And obviously we have bread lines now. Next slide. So yeah, so that wraps it up for my section. We can talk a little bit more later about 32 if anyone has any questions, but I'm going to hand it over to Gigi now to talk about LA84. Thanks a lot.
As Johnny said, Los Angeles was bidding unsuccessfully every summer since 1939, and that includes the Olympics that were canceled because of World War II. But because every year we bid for it, usually we only get the Olympics when nobody else wants it. They kind of keep us in their back pocket to give to somebody when nobody else wants it. And so we get it in years of economic recessions and times of uncertainty. And leading up to 1984, nobody really wanted the Olympics. This was because in 1972 in Munich, there were 11 Israeli athletes that had been taken hostage and killed. At the 1976 games, they left Montreal with $1 billion in deficit. And so by the time it was time to bid for the 1984 games, it was just Los Angeles and Tehran. Tehran couldn't take it because of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, so Los Angeles got it. Not only were the Olympics unpopular worldwide, they were unpopular in LA. Only 35 of those polled in LA County supported the Olympics if taxpayers were responsible for any deficit that might occur. So however, if the city was indemnified against loss, 81 actually supported it. And so what they did was they privatized the games. They made a deal that taxpayers would not pay for them. However, this actually just kind of shift the source of payment from the pocketbooks of the professional class to the bodies and labor of working class Angelenos. The first player in this story is Mayor Tom Bradley. He's a really interesting, complicated figure, but he took some political risk in championing the Olympics. And since the games were seen as a success, the privatization of the games immortalized him as a city leader and gave him the political will to push through his pet projects, which includes the International Airport Terminal that's named after him. He was really into that. He went every day to go see it while they were building it. And then while he himself received credit for the successful games, his focus on privatization excluded the government infrastructure that played a huge role in making sure that the games were what people might call a success. Because the programs that were used during the Olympics, like public transit, roads, and city agencies, they needed those. He then repeated this privatization strategy in 1992 during the Rebuild LA initiative. With this initiative, which Albert's going to talk about a little bit more later, he brought in corporate investment into minority communities to clean up the area, quote unquote, which then helped accelerate gentrification. Some people I've seen on Twitter trending yesterday, South Central LA has been renamed South LA at some point. That's because of gentrification. One of the other big players is Peter Uberoff. Here's a quote from him saying that authority is 80% taken and 20% given. Take it. It's a very interesting quote and kind of shows his point of view and how he sees the world. He was the Los Angeles Olympic Organizing Committee president, and he was also 1984's Man of the Year, Times Man of the Year, which shows how big the Olympics were seen in America as a success. At the time, though, he was a relatively unknown millionaire. He was just the CEO of the second largest travel company in the US, which was interesting that he might want the Olympics to come to LA, and a strong believer in private enterprise. After the Olympics, he used the perceived success of the private-public collaboration of the games as proof that the same could be done with welfare programs. He was also a very staunch Republican. He was very reactionary in his politics. He was very conservative. Was not somebody that, as you can see by when he wanted to privatize welfare programs, that's not really something that, you know, more progressive people want to do. I also wanted to bring a special mention to Casey Wasserman and Eric Garcetti. Right now in the Olympic process, they're being called the 84 boys. This is because they were both young boys during the 84 Olympics. Garcetti, actually, his very first priority when he became mayor was bringing the Olympics back to Los Angeles, which is kind of interesting because there's a lot of other things that need to be worked on in Los Angeles right now. And so it's kind of strange. AC Wasserman, actually, he was the one who ran the Olympic torch, and he did that because he's basically Hollywood royalty. His grandfather was a big Hollywood guy, and his future father-in-law was this guy Zifrin, who also was working with Uberoff on the 1984 Olympics. And so a lot of these people, even though he didn't really know his wife at the time, they're all kind of running in the same circles. It's a club of people that we're not a part of that are working together to build these Olympics, and they're to benefit themselves and not the rest of Los Angeles. They remember the Olympics very positively because they were rich white preteens who got to go see the games or run the torch. They didn't experience the oppressive policing that their working class and especially peers who were people of color were subjected to. As such, they kind of paint their crusade to bring the Olympics back to Los Angeles in terms of childhood nostalgia for a childhood that few of us had access to. This is just an interesting aside. Tom Bradley also had a boyhood fascination with the games. He talked about how in 1932, he watched the track stars compete through the fence of the Coliseum. I'm not a Freudian psychologist, so I'm not going to get any more into that. Please just enjoy this picture of Mayor Garcetti as a child. We also, somebody who benefited from the Olympics was my least favorite president, Ronald Reagan. Nationalists like Ronald Reagan just love the Olympics because they get to have big fascist rallies that people don't consider big fascist rallies. He actually was the first American president to officially open the Olympic Games. Hoover was invited to open the Olympic Games in 1932. But he said that he was busy with the Great Depression, and so he couldn't come and do that, which, you know, makes a lot of sense. I don't know. I'm having a hard time thinking about anything that Ronald Reagan could have been working on at the time. But, you know, I guess he made time to come, you know, open the Olympics. And then he used his appearance at the opening ceremonies to campaign for his 1984 re-election campaign, America is Back. We're going to take a quick movie break to watch a little film that is going to lead us into our next section with Albert.
I want to say, too, that the city of Los Angeles did a marvelous job, and a lot of terrific people in this town.
Eric Garcetti and the LA 2024 bid committee would like you to think that the 1984 Olympics were a success, but they were actually a nightmare for many communities in Los Angeles. The 84 Games provided the blueprint for the LAPD's new normal, defined by surveillance, militarization, and violence. It started with Police Chief Daryl Gates.
We have a war, a shooting war, not in the Middle East right now. We have it on the streets of every major city in this country. And you know who's feeding and supporting the enemy? The casual drug user.
Inventor of failed programs like DARE and coordinated brutality units like Operation Hammer and Crash. Gates led the LAPD throughout the 80s and early 90s, stepping down after he failed the people of LA during the 1992 uprising.
I've seen much of LA's post-war history. The Watts riots, the riots of 1992, the Black Panther and SLA shootouts, the Marilyn Monroe investigation, Robert Kennedy's assassination, the 1984 Olympic Games, as well as literally hundreds of other shootouts.
With the eyes of the world in Los Angeles for the 1984 Games, Gates swept the city of so-called undesirables and criminal elements. Thousands of Black and Latinx men, the LAPD arrested as alleged gang members and associates with zero evidence or due process. These Olympic sweeps were nothing short of a human rights disaster and created the template for the LAPD brutality and overreach that still defines the force today. Even after Daryl Gates stepped down as police chief, the LAPD force continues to be as lawless and as violent as ever, and yet it could get even worse. If Los Angeles gets to the Olympics again in 2024 or 2028, the bid committee has designated the Games as a national special security event, allowing the federal government to control all security for the Olympics and essentially oversee the LAPD for the summer. By putting agencies like the Department of Homeland Security and FBI in charge of our city, we can guarantee massive human rights violations, deportations, criminalization, and an overall increase in police militarization and surveillance. And for what?
This is a good time also to thank the generous corporations that decided a few years back to contribute money and personnel and time to help our athletes.
To line the pockets of the already wealthy. That's the true Los Angeles Olympic legacy.
And with that, I'm going to hand the torch off to Albert for our next section.
Hey everyone, just want to say that's a great video. Love watching it. My name's Albert Corrado, and I am here to talk about policing. And so right now I just want to give you a little bit of a background about LA and 84 in regards to the economic picture. Los Angeles in 84, much like Los Angeles in 2020, is a place of huge income inequality. Median income in 84 was $15,696, and median income today is $27,749. So it's only gone up by 12,000 in, almost 40 years. It's kind of insane. At the time, unemployment around the country in 1984 was 7.5%, and the number of unemployed people in LA in 84 was right under 1 million. Next slide, please. So, getting back to Daryl Gates, he was the LAPD chief from 1978 to 1992, but was on the force for much longer than that. He was widely disliked due to his blatant racism and refusal to discipline officers who use excessive force and kill people. He was quoted as saying about the casual drug users, that casual drug use is treason, helped create the DARE program. Full disclosure, I was part of the DARE program when I was a kid, so I'd like to apologize. And he resigned in 1992 after the uprising. Next slide, please. So the LAPD of the early 80s, by the 80s, the LAPD was already known to be one of the most murderous police forces in the country. LAPD in the 80s was also known to use a chokehold on a lot of suspects. Many died from having their flow of oxygen cut off, and Gates called it a valuable tool. Most of those who died were Black, and Chief Gates asked his training personnel to research if Black people reacted differently to the chokehold than quote unquote normal people. After the families of the victims and community activists protested and sought to have the chokehold banned, the LAPD acquiesced. Next slide, please. Found this cursed image online, so y'all have to enjoy it. This is the 84 Games in LA, like encapsulated. It's just two officers and the badge, and they're just like looking so stoic. Next slide, please. So now we get to the CRASH unit. Stood for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, and it was a specialized unit of the LAPD that was created to combat gang-related crime. CRASH rarely patrolled more affluent neighborhoods and stuck to mostly working class communities dense with people of color, obviously. Started in 1979, it was disbanded in 2000 because of the Rampart scandal, which I will touch on later. Used racial profiling to arrest mostly Black and Latinx men around Los Angeles, and Black and Latinx youths were labeled urban terrorists and ruthless killers by the CRASH unit. Next slide, please. So in the run-up to the Olympics, obviously, you know, they want to make the city clean or whatever. The city began to conduct what were called Olympic sweeps. So gang sweeps were expanded, but mostly to working class neighborhoods close to the Coliseum where, you know, the games would take place. And those communities were basically under military occupation. The CRASH unit arrested anyone who they thought might make the city look bad to tourists and the TV cameras. And most people who were arrested around that time and for those reasons had not broken any laws, and most were never charged with any crimes at all. Next slide, please. Suspected gang members were arrested and sometimes even deported. There were reports that INS conducted sweeps of undocumented taxi drivers. And the homeless population didn't fare very well either. They were constantly being harassed by LAPD. City Council member Gilbert Lindsay recommended relocating the homeless to a drunk farm near Saugus in an effort to clean up the city. Laws that banned people from sleeping in cars and sleeping on bus benches were implemented. I just want to note recently, Donald Trump came to LA to talk to Garcetti about the Olympics and said he was going to send the federal government to clean the city up. And I mean, listen, if you pay attention to city council, I mean, the rhetoric's always been the same. The city council right now hates unhoused people and is always trying to criminalize them. So it's been the same since then and now. So next slide, please. So all the Olympic sweeps led to paramilitary armament. Federal agents and National Guardsmen descended on the city and were put on Olympic alert. At the time, it was the largest peacetime operation that had ever been assembled. Bomb detecting dogs and bomb disposal experts were also brought in. Sniper teams, hostage rescue teams, and over 100 military helicopters were on standby, and a huge arsenal of weapons was specially assembled for the Olympics, including silenced machine guns and sniper rifles. Gotta have those. Next slide, please. All right, and that later on in the 80s, they started what was called Operation Hammer, started by the Crash Unit. It was LAPD's attempt to once again crack down on gang violence. 24,684 Black youths were arrested. At the height of the operation, 1,453 people were arrested in a single weekend. Police brutality complaints rose 33% between 1984 and 1989, and this helped set the tone for decades of overreach and brutality by LAPD, which we are still seeing to this day. Next slide, please. Raids were a common tactic used by the Crash Unit in Operation Hammer, used mainly to intimidate Black and Latinx communities. Much of the equipment used in the raids, like battering rams and high-powered weapons, were inherited by the LAPD after the Olympic Games left town. The most famous of these raids happened on August 1st, 1988. 88 LAPD officers conducted a drug raid on an apartment complex in South LA. They punched holes in walls, destroyed furniture, and vandalized the walls of one person's apartment with graffiti that read LAPD rules. Residents from the neighborhood were rounded up to be beaten and humiliated, and the raid only produced 6 ounces of marijuana and less than an ounce of cocaine. And I'm sure most people on this call have more than 6 ounces of marijuana like in their house. Next slide, please. While these tactics were criticized by members of the affected communities, not everyone hated them. Church groups like the United Neighborhoods Organization and South Central Organizing Committee called for a permanent Olympics in which there would be continued high police presence even after the games left. And Maxine Waters even went as far as to ask Mayor Tom Bradley and the LAPD to continue providing Olympic level policing on a regular basis. Next slide, please. All right, so obviously, no Olympics is part of the Olympic resistance. There has been Olympic resistance, I mean, even way back in 1932. So we're just happy to carry on that legacy. But around the time of the '84 Olympics, there was the Federation for Progress. They were founded in 1982, and they were a coalition of left-leaning orgs that planned statewide protests to coincide with the Olympics and the Democratic National Convention in San Francisco. It was staffed mainly by members of the Communist Workers' Party and supported by orgs like the ACLU, Catholic Workers, and a lot of racial justice and immigrant groups from around LA. Next slide, please. The Federation for Progress held a series of protests that took place in MacArthur Park, known as Survival Fest '84. It took place over a week, and a total of 10,000 people marched. The largest of these marches was Survival Day '84 on August 5th, 1984, and it drew 3,500 people alone, and that was right around the time that the games were happening. They also demanded that the LAOC distribute a portion of the Olympic Games profits to low-income neighborhoods. They also marched against Reagan's domestic and foreign policies, and of course, members of the Federation were placed on watch lists. I wonder if we're on any watch lists. I hope so. Next slide. Okay, so as we get into the 90s and LAPD's, running amok and just doing all these horrible things, I just want to give a little bit of context to the uprising and its connection to LA84 if it sort of hasn't come together for you yet. So the Olympics exacerbated what was already a grim economic situation in LA. Most of the jobs created by the games were non-union, temporary employment. and disappeared once the games left. The year after the games, a group of minority business owners, most facing bankruptcy, sued the LAOOC for $44 million for failure to abide by agreements that gave them exclusive rights to sell souvenirs during the games. Olympic sweeps, Crash, and Operation Hammer paved the way for the uprising by helping strain the already tenuous relationship between law enforcement and communities of color. Next slide, please. And so on March 16, 1991, a 15-year-old Latasha Harlins was gunned down by Korean store owner Soon Ja-do while trying to buy some juice. A jury found Do guilty of involuntary manslaughter, which brings with it a maximum sentence of 16 years. The judge, Joyce Carlin, awful person, rejected the jury's decision and instead sentenced Do to 5 years probation, 400 hours community service, and a $500 fine. Next slide, please. And just 2 weeks before Latasha Harlins, we have the most famous sort of incident that sort of, is always looked at as the start of the uprising. Rodney King was pulled over on March 3rd, 1991. 4 LAPD officers viciously beat him, and someone caught it on tape, and it went viral in a time before there was the internet. The 4 officers involved were arrested and at first were due to stand trial here in Los Angeles, but they moved it to Simi Valley, which is an affluent suburb in Ventura County full of a lot of rich white people. On April 29th, 1992, the officers who beat Rodney King were found not guilty of having used excessive force by a largely white jury. And that night, the city exploded into unrest. And next slide, please. For 5 days, large portions of the city burned, and the LAPD was all but absent from the most affected communities. Thousands of troops were brought in on the 4th day to restore order. The city of Los Angeles' streets were once again filled with military personnel for the second time in a decade. Federal troops did not stand down until May 9th, and some National Guardsmen remained until May 27th. By the end of the uprising, 63 people were dead and $1 billion worth of property damage had been done. Next slide, please. And that's just a picture I found, which is, one of the most, notable pictures of it. And it says right there, look what you created. So next slide, please. So in the aftermath of the uprising, a private relief organization called Rebuild LA was created to supposedly help the communities affected by the uprising. Some of the same players from LA84 were part of this, most notably Peter Uberoth, who was chosen by Tom Bradley to help run it. And one of its stated goals was to require business owners to hire people from areas affected by the uprising. Next slide, please. Many criticize the organization for not actually caring about the neighborhoods it was created to help, and for many of its members being rich white men from Orange County. Valid. Rebuild LA claimed to have $500 million in commitments from large companies that were willing to invest in South Central LA, but an LA Times investigation later showed that many of the companies Rebuild LA had listed as willing to invest had no plans of doing so. Peter Uberoth stepped down a year after being appointed the head of Rebuild LA, and after 5 years, Rebuild LA was dismantled, leaving behind a trail of broken promises. Next slide, please. And to end the decade, the 90s, the wild 90s that we all remember, more than the Rampart scandal happened. More than 70 LAPD officers who were members of the Crash unit were implicated in wide-scale corruption and were responsible for a long list of offenses, including unprovoked shootings, beatings, bank robberies, dealing of narcotics, planting evidence, and cover-up, just to name a few. Right there, that is Rafael Perez, who was kind of the guy who brought it all crashing down. He was a very bad man. If you've seen Training Day, actually, Denzel's supposed to kind of be like a caricature of him. So 106 prior convictions credited to the Crash unit were overturned because of the scandal. And the scandal cost the city $125 million in settlements. To this day, several rape, homicide, and burglary cases involving Rampart officers remain unsolved. And I think Johnny is gonna hop back in to give us a sort of the ending overview of the legacy of LA84.
So we gave you the presentation of, mostly like what actually happened. Unfortunately, if you were not there, most of this information did not make it to this century. Most people do know the ins and outs of these details or have not made these connections. They might know some of the pieces of it, but don't have the analysis together. My day job is, for the most part, journalism. And LA's journalistic landscape has been fraught for a long, long time, and it's really in about now. And it's always been one of my pet theories that if we had a more robust media landscape, we might, like Boston did, for example, we may not have the Olympic bid right now. So all that said, in 2017, before we started organizing, the press was all rah rah. The Olympics are coming back. This is going to be good for the city. We're the only city that's ever made money off them. You know, it's going to be like 84, where there was no traffic. The city made money, and we had this like soft artistic legacy. So, and what happened is once we started organizing, we started puncturing those myths. And in the last few years, we've seen a lot of press, both locally and now internationally in some cases, starting to look at LA84 with a much more critical lens, because screaming it from the mountaintops this whole time. And here are just a few clips on this slide, just one of just of where that where you can see in the headlines how our work is starting to influence the narrative and make people rethink 1984. Next slide. So, you know, we have a piece coming out soon. We're not going to go deep into the artistic legacy of 84, but if you're interested in that, couple articles coming out later in the month where we even puncture some holes into that, because it turns the IOC doesn't give a shit about athletes or artists, really, that as soon as the Olympics are over, they don't really have them to preserve any of the art or culture that they supposedly care about during the game. Yeah, so they like Michelle says, they basically shut city and discourage people from using public transit during the course of the games, why there was no traffic. That's not really a solution to, you know, arguably the most broken transit system in America. But for a while before we got involved, people were making action. Oh, we can have no traffic again, like we did in '84. And the biggest, I think, outside of all the kind of puppy dogs and ice cream of the LA84 Olympics is the idea of the money. It's like, oh, LA84 made money. There was technically a surplus of, you know, a couple $100 million. The problem with that is that A, we don't think it's worth all the harm. But, you know, $200 million is like, if we want $200 million, there's a lot of other we can, you know, tax our base to get that if that's really if that's LA needs. But more than that, that money never went back to the city. That money immediately siphoned into what was then called the AAF, and was later rebranded as the LA84 Foundation, which is a private foundation. We as Angelinos, no influence on where that money can be spent. And so during the last 3 years, we've done some digging, and I think Adam was one of the original ones who's on the call, or Robin, who we started digging in LA84's taxes, and we found out that millions of dollars invested in Goldman Sachs, Blackstone, all sorts of people who focus on distressed, you know, properties, buyers, oil and gas, banks. My cats are fighting right behind me. So we basically found that that money, LA did not make that money. That money went back to be controlled by a very small amount of people. It's mostly people from 84 games, like the organizers and their, you know, kind of nephews and kids or whatever. And so this LA84 Foundation still exists. They have a ton of money. Their reported mission is to serve communities in need that more, you know, after school sports and stuff like this. But our investigation also found that they don't even spend the 5% that nonprofits are supposed to spend on their mission. So they're technically in violation of also their like nonprofit rules. And it's clearly a shell company to make money for rich people that are already rich. So we have a huge problem with the premise that 84 made money. And so I think over the course of the last few years, we've really put it, at the very least, put a dent in some of these narratives, if not shattered a lot of them. We now see the press talking about police militarization and brutality. We see them talk about the homeless sweeps in the Olympics. We've seen them talking more and more about LA84 Foundation. The problem is that LA Times has been a media sponsor of the LA84 Foundation for 5 years, because the staff at the LA Times, Renata Simrel, or the former chief of staff, is now the CEO of the foundation. So it's not really in their interest to go digging there. But we are, and if you And if you know, one thing I can put to y'all is to start, talking about LA84 Foundation more and really people understand what's going on there. Next slide, please. The last thing I'm going to go with is an email that Adrian Riskin found in one of his public requests, where we have Casey Wasserman, the CEO of LA 2028, sharing one of the articles from a few slides ago about the headline is LA Olympics 2028, the city treat its homeless, which essentially includes a lot of our talking points and analysis. So we've got Casey, one of the richest, powerful people in LA, talking to this is 2018, the new chief of police, Michael Moore, and Steve Soboroff from the Police Commission. And they're basically agreeing that the LA84 Olympics were fucked up from a policing standpoint, that they do not want to, or that at least, from where we're standing, that that they're validating our concerns. So we've got Steve Soboroff saying it's an LAPD than 1984, but the questions are valid. Looking forward to our get together. And this is because Casey Wasserman gives millions of dollars to the LA Police Foundation. So that's why they were talking to begin with. So again, this email itself will not get the goods, but we thought it was very kind of we have had many small victories along the way, and this was particularly one of them when it talks to the narrative of it, that the chief of police is trying to get ahead of this now. And I don't think they would be having this conversation were it not for our work. Oh, sorry. I misspoke earlier. LA only got, or LA84 Foundation got 90 million of that Olympic surplus from 84, and they've grown that to be more than that now through Blackstone and whatnot. But either way, the kind of point is that we don't get to say over where that money goes. And not only is it not going to like places we want them, it's funding Blackstone, who is literally burning the Amazon and destroying, the housing market in California 2 decades. So now we can get into talking about how this connects to our work. But before we do that, over to Gigi, we wanted to open up for questions real quick. Did anyone have any questions about anything you heard? Start talking about how this relates to what we're doing in 2020. You can feel free in the chat if you can't unmute yourself, just say stack, or if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that one of the things that I know happened in '84 was that a lot of the tech companies and phone companies moved in, and because like the college I was at, they wanted to occupy the campus, which was near the Coliseum, and they donated a ton of phone equipment, updated the whole phone system at the college, all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that that's another thing that will happen, and that probably happened greatly for the LAPD, where they started a lot of their technology buildup and their surveillance and all of that other kind of thing. So these companies move in because they want to have control over the broadcasting of the Olympics or the talking about it, whatever, and then they give big gifts.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen, the overlap between technology companies and private security companies is pretty strong in this too. So yeah, we've seen a lot of people talking about how, we had at UCLA earlier this year, after they wrote a really cool op-ed in the student paper about why the Olympics are bad. A couple of weeks after that, came to us and Stop LAPD Spying and other folks saying that UCLA is planning to roll facial recognition soon on their campuses. And the students believe that it had to do with the Olympics, even though they're not saying it there. So yeah, we're keeping an eye on that. And UCLA, which we don't really have time to get into, is going to be heavily leveraged for this Olympics as well. So at some point we might do a whole USCLA teach-in, because there's just so much money and private security and PREDL and all this other stuff running through these universities, and it's very connected to the Olympics. Did anyone else have a comment or a question about anything you heard? I know it's a lot of information. Adam, go for it. Or can you unmute yourself right now for it?
Yeah, just a really unpleasant note about the, how close we are to '84 and '92 and stuff, that one of the first LAPD officer to be convicted of anything stemming from the Rodney King beating was a guy named Lou Turiaga, who just stood there and watched the beating. And up until last year, he was one of the board of directors at the Los Angeles Police Protective League, the so-called union of the LAPD. So this shit, like, yeah, that shit runs deep.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna add it to the slides, Adam. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anne, did you have something?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add for context. I just pulled up an article and just, I think it's hard sometimes when we're talking about these big numbers to contextualize it, just because like I don't have access to $90 million. So like what does that actually mean? And so 90 million, the amount that went into this private foundation. And, as Johnny mentioned, like where else could money like that come from? That's like, I think half of what Garcetti proposed in his latest budget to increase, to add to the police budget. Like that was around 150 million. So even if Garcetti increased the police budget slightly less, that's, just like one way. And then the other thing, I had heard, I couldn't find an article mentioning this, but I heard it from a Latu comrade in East LA, Frank Hernandez, who was one of the officers who really brutally assaulted an unhoused man in Boyle Heights, where I live, a few weeks ago. He's someone who has come up every few years for violence. He's shot and killed a number of people. And he came out of Rampart and an Operation Hammer. That's kind of, he's a product of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the New Century, you've seen, you saw it in that email from Michael Moore, they brand that, that's held as like the gold standard of like bad policing, like Daryl Gates. They try what they can to reframe the conversation around data or whatever, but it's the same LAPD.
Right. Like Steve Soberoff saying like, oh, it's a completely different LAPD. And it's like, no, it's literally the same people, and they are consistently killing people in the same neighborhoods. Like Frank Hernandez, I think most of the people he's killed have been between Westlake and Boyle Heights.
Just a quick tangent, and we'll probably go a little bit over 1 p.m. if people want to stick around, and we have a couple of discussion questions, and if you want to talk about getting involved with organizing or whatever, you please ask. But I just wanted to mention on Steve Soberoff just how intersectional everything is and how interconnected it is. Steve Soberoff was the main architect, not the literal architect, but the brain, I don't use brain in connection to him, but he was the guy who came up with the idea for Staples Center. So if you want to talk about inhabitability of downtown or LA in general, we can really thank him for, kind of straddling both real estate, gentrification, and policing, and kind of showing how it's all connected, because that's the story of this century too. It's about, hotel and luxury development and gentrification, which was born out of this idea to reimagine LA after the uprising. We kind of have these big, really violent cycles in LA in particular of like getting really bad, and then business interests kind of in many cases coupled with the Olympics coming in to save and reimagine LA. Right, and his son is Jacob Soberoff, who broke the immigration family separation story a few years ago.
I think Adam is on stack.
Oh, great, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I just love talking about Steve Soberoff, and I mentioned it in the chat above, but Steve Soberoff was Mayor Riordan's like hand-picked successor in 2000, and he ran as a Republican, and out of 18 or something candidates at the beginning, he was the only one that publicly was against the federal consent decree of the LAPD coming out of the Rampart scandal. And as soon as the Rampart scandal was lifted in 2013, our boy Eric appointed Soberoff to the police commission, where for the last 7 years, he spent 5 of them as the president. And I don't think that I think that has so much to do with like the kind of LA that Garcetti's been building. You know what I mean?
Totally. But yeah, I mean, does anyone want to talk about, sorry, I lost my slide. Excuse me. Gigi, do you want to go over some of the discussion questions we had?
Sure. Yeah, so we're just going to have a little bit of an open-ended discussion talking about connections to LA 2028. One of the first things that we wanted to ask is, which we were kind of actually just talking about, how have we seen echoes from Olympics, from the past Olympics in today's LA? I think we've already kind of touched on that. If anyone has anything else to answer about that, feel free to add yourself on stack. And if not, we can move on.
Yeah, totally. We don't have to.
Yeah.
I feel like connections were made along the way.
Yeah, I think we've covered that. So another question we wanted to ask everybody is, what do you think are some of the opportunities we have to inform people of this troubled past?
Right, like you all have this information now. You all probably had a good idea that was bad. Some of you remember it being bad, but maybe didn't know all these details. We have some films. We have some other kind of, documentary work in the background trying to address this. And so yeah, if people have ideas of how to get this narrative out there to people and start challenging people's memories of '84 in on a broader scale, please feel free to shout them out. Oh yeah, if you want to learn about the '96, Michael just put something in the chat, and one of our comrades, Steven, wrote a really cool at the end of last year about, after the Richard Jewell movie came out, what was really going on in Atlanta, and you will not be shocked to learn that it's very similar to what happened in LA84. And again, I think that's it. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Were you going to say something, Gigi? Sorry.
Oh, I was just calling Alexis still on stack, but I didn't realize you wanted to finish that.
No, I'm done. Go for it, Alexis.
Oh, excuse me. I think a good way to have inform people and kind of allow help people remember LA84. I wasn't alive back then. I was born in '99, so all of this is kind of new information to me. I always thought that LA84, the organization was great, because my dad was around, my grandma was around, so they were oh yeah, help build pools or whatever. So I think kind of helping those people see that it wasn't so great. And I had tried to tell my dad, I had seen your guys' page and stuff, and I had tried to tell him oh, maybe it's not so great, kind of the Olympics helped create the sentiments that were that led to the 1992 uprising. And he's just no, it was just Rodney King and stuff like that. So I think a lot of those connections were never made for people who were around back then, and they just kind of saw the what little good did come out of that.
Yeah, and I think kind of that relates to what Johnny was even saying earlier about how LA doesn't have a really robust media and press system right
exactly.
now.
Right. Exactly. And that's something I'm focusing on a lot is, if you look at KC and see who's on the board, it's Renata Simrel, it's Fernando Guerra who's running these fraudulent polls out of LMU. It's, there's 3 or 4 news in LA that cover local news, and they're all part of the Olympic money system. So we're still going to fight like hell on that front. When the LA Times or whoever wants to cover, we know that we've obviously been generating a lot of our own money and doing a lot of door knocking last year in particular, and outreach in different ways. But yeah, people have other ideas. We can definitely make this. We're going to make a couple little updates to this deck, but everyone should have. I think we've been in contact on email. So if you want this demo group that wants to see this information, please let us know. We're also, I should mention, about to kick off a transnational. Well, I mean, it's all part of the same kind of educational projects for this year for us. But we have We have a bunch of coming out. And did you want to say a couple of things about that? And we don't have anything hard dates figured out yet, but want to tease some of the other stuff that we're going to be doing soon?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, the first thing I was going to say is thank you guys for putting this together. Like, I've been pretty steeped in this for a number of years now, and I learned a lot from this. There's just a lot of great stuff in here, and it's really exciting. And I know something like I'm going to do personally, and it's like a little cheesy, but I would suggest maybe other people can do this if they feel comfortable. Like, I'm going to post something on my own personal social media, just saying like, I was at this teach-in today, and here's a cool thing I learned. And a lot of my friends and family, like, I talk about this stuff, but there's like 50 of us on this call, and if every single person just posted one thing they learned, I think that could just be a quick way to share information. And then in terms of the transnational series, which I would count LA as part of, like, any, we're going to have a few on LA, but we have, I know, not to embarrass you or call attention, but we have a comrade from Italy who's on the line right now. So talking to folks in other cities that are facing Olympic bids about why they're opposing them, and what they're doing to organize and fight back. So hearing from the different struggles in Italy, as well as in France, our comrades in Paris who are fighting the 2024 bid. We have one coming up that we're working on. We actually have a call tonight with a comrade in South Korea about the Olympics and environmental destruction. Kind of, they're actually taking a day trip today to the south, to the region where the 2018 Olympics were had, and making a new video. And they did a really great presentation in Tokyo this past summer about kind of what happens, and then also more broadly, like how the different corporations and politicians and developers were able to use the Olympics to permanently change environmental law in Korea. So they're planning a teach-in around that. Our comrades in Tokyo, who are predominantly unhoused and led by unhoused folks, are going to do sort of a combination. I think they're going to talk about the criminalization and displacement of unhoused folks in Tokyo around the 2020 games, and also what's happening right now in terms of the postponement and cancellation, and how things have changed around coronavirus and the pandemic. So yeah. Oh, and then also very exciting, based in LA, some members of the Lenox Inglewood Tenants Union were planning a teach-in for probably mid-June, focusing on stadium displacement. So for most folks who are in LA are probably aware, the huge SoFi Stadium that's currently, it's been deemed essential, even though all sports are canceled, and all of the construction workers who are building it, it's become a huge COVID hotspot. People are getting really sick and dying. And at the same time, it is continuing to displace people due to accelerating gentrification. So the Lenox Inglewood Tenants Union is fighting back, and then hopefully we're talking to some of the folks from Buried Under the Blue, who are the descendants of the families who were displaced by Dodger Stadium. So talking about again, this legacy and history in LA of how not just the Olympics, but the larger like sports industrial complex have been used to further real estate developer consolidation.
I think Audrey's on stack.
I just want to mention, I mean, the most often, if you mention this campaign, people will say, but it's too late. Just the major public perception, I think, is it's a done deal and you're just spinning your wheels. And I just wanted to just say that 4 years ago, when I first started getting involved in the jail fight, people, contracts were being signed, and environmental impact statements had been approved and everything. And people just said, it's too late to stop those jails. It's a moving train, you'll never do it. And it got done. So I just wanted to mention, you can push back against that whole concept that it's too late.
Absolutely. That's a really powerful story. And one thing that's happened since we started organizing is, you may remember from like 2 years ago, the Amazon HQ2 bidding cycle, which was like the Olympic cycle on steroids, happened. And they chose Northern Virginia and Queens as the sites at the end of this really extractive bidding process. And they said, politicians and the business interested, there was no vote, obviously, like in the Olympics, there's no votes. And, the media announced, oh, this is a done deal. And then all of a sudden, tenants in Queens got really buff and they started organizing in a coalition, and very quickly, and they knocked like every door in Queens and they pushed it out, even though it was a done deal. They had a lot more exigent sources because they were going to be groundbreaking like immediately. But I totally agree that like there's absolutely especially in pandemic and this kind of historical moment or whatever, realizing that like nothing is set in stone, right? Like nothing is guaranteed. Sportsism in general might not exist the way that they did 6 months ago in 10 years, let alone our whole economy and tourism and the hotel industry and all these things that are deeply tied to it. So we feel like if anything, right, like in the public perception is that it's a done deal, and we can look back to so many examples in history of things that were done deals until, right? It's a contract. Contracts are broken all the time, right? And I think there's a lot of opportunities now too to kind of tether this conversation with what's happening with like the people's city count or the people's budget, people's city council, as we all start to think about what is it that we want, And another thing I wanted to flag too on Anne's suggestion, which I think is a great suggestion, if the first thing you could do after this call is just jump on Twitter, today I learned so-and-so, use the No Olympics Anywhere hashtag, and see if people get excited about that, because there's so many people in LA just that haven't been presented with the counter argument. And we found through our own research and polling that there is actually not a lot of strong support for Olympics, even though in the media they try to make it seem like there really is not, that we found. So if you hear stories like Alexis's story about Dodger displacement, about LA84, please bring those to us too, because we're kind of looking to document these stories, because most of them have been scrubbed from like mainstream media. So that's another way that you could help out. And I wanted to flag too that we have our general organizing meetings every other week. Our next general organizing meeting